Hi, my dear Astro family. I think this is one of my last videos about 2025. I have made a lot. I hope you have managed to watch them all. I made a video about Neptune in Aries, Saturn in Aries, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, Uranus in Gemini. I made videos about two major asteroids are changing sign as well. That was Pallas Athene and Juno. I also made a video about Mars retrograde and then its connection to Pluto, which is going to be coloring 2025, of course. And of course, the Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, Mercury retrograde, which is going to be pretty much affecting the beginning of the year. And then now we've got Venus retrograde to talk about. So let's get started. But actually, before we do that, if you would like to have a personal reading with me, then you might want to be considering that. You can even gift it to someone. Christmas is coming up. And also, if you would like to study with me, I've got a couple of very interesting courses coming up. One of them is going to be about synastry. Now, synastry is about comparing two people's chart and then looking at how compatible they are. This was a kind of like a special request from many of my students to kind of put a course together on that. So I decided to do that. I am hopeful that you guys are going to be interested in this. And secondly, I'm also going to be doing a second part of that synastry course, which is going to be based on on sexology, because I think that is a big component of a working relationship. And there are some webinars as well that are coming up next month. One of them is going to be the planets and their traumatic experiences. So each planet represents trauma somehow. And also, I'm going to be doing one about whether liars can be seen through the chart. So check all those out on my website. But now let's get started with this Venus retrograde. Now, Venus is a very interesting planet. And let's just give a couple of keywords to Venus from a astronomical point of view. Of course, on one hand, this is going to be symbolizing love, beauty, money, but also it represents our style, whether we are greedy or not. These are some of the keywords to consider with Venus. And every 18 months, approximately about 18 months, Venus goes retrograde. So Venus retrograde, for example, in the birth chart is the rarest. Approximately the retrogression happens about 9% of the population on top of my head. So this is not something that is happening every single day. And whenever Venus is retrograde, it's basically asking us to rethink what we value, but also how our relationship looks like, and so forth. Now, Venus goes retrograde for 40 days. And often, yes, when Venus goes retrograde, especially by progression, by the way, then we've got a little bit of a kind of like turning around in our relationships. So often it comes in breakups, or we're going to make up with someone, and so forth. So, retrograde, we just need to be able to know that it's about re-evaluation, revisiting certain type of topics in our life. Now, many people know Mercury retrograde, and it comes with its own myth. Venus retrograde, thank God it doesn't necessarily come with it, but we tend to be saying, oh, do not go on a date when Venus is retrograde because it's really bad for you, right? And we just need to be a little bit more careful with that, because Venus is going to be retrograde for what, 40 days, and it's going to be in the shadow period as well, twice. So therefore, it impacts could be lasting for about 4 months. Well, I'm going to give you some dates actually, how I would be looking at this Venus retrograde, because it's going to be lasting basically from 2025 January until 2026 January. Why is that? First of all, we're gonna have 28th of January 2025 when Venus will enter its shadow period or retrograde zone. Now, basically, the retrograde zone is where the planet turns direct and where the planet goes retrograde. So Venus will be turning direct on 24 degree of Pisces. So it will be entering that zone on the 28th of January 2025. Then Venus goes retrograde on the 2nd of March 2025 on 10 degree of Aries. Then it's going to be making an inferior conjunction with the Sun on the 23rd of March. Basically, that's when Venus is reborn. It's going to be happening on 2 degree of Aries. Then 13th of April, Venus is going to be moving stationary direct, and that's again happening on 24 degree of Pisces. And then on the 16th of May, Venus leaves its retrograde zone again on 10 degree of Aries. And then we're going to have a superior conjunction happening on 6th of January 2026 on 16 degree of Capricorn. Now, I've given you four very important degrees: 24 Pisces, 10 Aries, 2 Aries, and 16 degree of Capricorn. If you have got any planets on those particular degrees, then this video is actually really important for you. Because often what happens with Venus retrograde, that we just tend to be looking at, the Venus retrograde period, but we are not looking at the next conjunction. So obviously, while Venus is retrograde, it's making a conjunction with the Sun at a particular place, but it's lasting until the next conjunction, and that's going to be happening on 2026 January 6 on 16 degree of Capricorn. So basically, this is an entire 1 year aspect here. So when Venus stations retrograde, your feelings about things and people and relationship and money, basically your value system could be changing quite a lot. It is giving you an opportunity to realign with something. And also, you can figure something out about your own relationship style. You can figure out how you truly feel about your partner, about yourself, and so forth. So, there is definitely a need here to pay attention to your individuality because it's going to be happening in the sign of Aries. And yes, maybe we all have to be looking at our relationships, whether we are i- kind of like in a harmony. Can I be myself with my partner, or am I being suffocated, or do I feel like I have to be pleasing them? And that people pleaser side is coming from the fact that obviously Venus is in the sign of Aries and it's going to be opposing the Libra element. And it's very interesting that we had the nodes in the sign of Aries and Libra. So if we haven't done any of the karmic work about how we relate to others and whether we can leave kind of like the people pleaser side of ours behind, then Venus is actually bringing this issue back to you. So I'm going to give you kind of like an example. Imagine that the nodes kind of magnify the issue of individuality in your relationship in the last 18 months. And then if you haven't dealt with it, then Venus is actually going to bring it back to you. So is there a harmony in my relationship? Do we have a kind of like an understanding? Do we allow each other to be who we want to be? These are going to be very special topics for you. But maybe we need to kind of talk a little bit about what a retrograde is. You might not know that, but a retrograde is very much about the planet looks like it's moving backwards, but actually it is not true. Actually, all planets go backwards except the sun and the moon. Um, from a retrograde point of view, but what I'm trying to say here is that it doesn't go backwards. It just looks like it from an Earth point of view. And And sometimes we tend to associate retrogrades also that weird things are happening, for example, in our life, because the movement of the planet is not according to its own nature. Saturn likes being retrograde, for example, because Saturn is about slowliness. So when I'm slowed down, Saturn kind of enjoys it. But the rest of the planet might not enjoy it as much because they would like to move forward. So this is the reason why sometimes weird things could be happening. Now, Venus retrograde is really fascinating. As I said, Venus goes retrograde for 40 days, and 40 appears in the Bible multiple times. And the number 40 comes with kind of like tests and punishments and purifications and so forth. So does Venus retrograde connect to those that maybe our relationship goes through certain type of tests? We get kind of punished for all the, all the mistakes that we made, for example, financially and so forth. And this is actually possible. Now, at the halfway point of Venus retrograde, the Earth, Venus, and the Sun align in that particular order, and that's when we're going to have basically an inferior conjunction. And that is basically when Venus is moving from a evening star to a morning star. So it's going to be basically about whether it's rising before the sun or setting basically. But then 216 days later, Venus forms another conjunction with the sun, and that's what we're going to call as a superior conjunction. So approximately about 9 months later. And then we've got again that Earth, Sun, and Venus configuration. And then that's when Venus again becomes an evening star. So now the morning star Venus, actually called as the Luciferian phase of Venus, which is a little bit more impulsive, extroverted, and so forth. And of course, that Venus is going to be in the sign of Aries, and that is extroverted, that is kind of impulsive, and that could become quite angry as well, right? And then when Venus becomes an evening star, we call it as the Hesperus phase of Venus. And that tends to be a little bit more on the mindful side. That is a little bit more about common senses and so forth. And it's going to be interesting that Venus superior conjunction is going to be happening in the sign of Capricorn, which is quite cool-headed anyway. So what I'm trying to actually explain to you here that 9 month window until the next the 9 month window until the next conjunction, 2026 January, Venusian matters could be quite all over the place. And of course, Venus, for example, in the political world is about alliances and peacemaking and so forth. And this might be coming with certain type of struggles. But one of the ways you can work with Venus, because it has got really a periodic movements. So basically, Venus moves in cycles. Every 8 years, it she is a retrograde in the very same sign. So therefore, Venus cannot go retrograde more than in 5 signs. So it has got that cyclical pattern going on, which on one hand surely is telling you that we need to be able to reflect on past relationship, past money matters, and so forth. We need to be able to connect the dots. And the last time when Venus was retrograde in the sign of Aries, that was 2017, March and April. So I would just call it as 2017. Uh, you're gonna have to go back and then look at what the heck was going down in my life around that time. Because maybe there is something that is affecting your present moment, or there is something that needs a solution. Or thirdly, it could also indicate that you are meant to be kind of like finishing something off. So I'm going to give you an example. 2017, I do remember being extremely drunk twice, and then I proposed someone at a bar. So maybe this 2025, it mustn't, or it doesn't have to be the same person, but maybe it's going to be a proposal. And this time around, I'm meant to be moving forward with it. So maybe this time around, let's say I'm going to be proposing someone and I'm not going to get a no from that person. Oh, because I got a no in 2017, actually twice. Okay. So that's where it's very important that with Venus retrograde, you reevaluate your relationships, your self-worth, your values. And in a way, maybe you had certain type of ideas about what would be important to you in a relationship, and that might be changing significantly. So, of course, Venus is not only about romantic partnerships, though, because this is the planet of connection. So you could be connecting with friends, with family, with, business partners or stuff like, or even yourself. So you might start questioning these type of connections with others. So that would be somehow a little bit of a. And also, maybe what you need to be also looking at, because Venus represents also joy and a little bit of a drama as well. It has got planetary joy in the fifth house. And what we like doing and how I like expressing myself, those also could be topics that you need to be reevaluating. So there is that introspection going on with Venus. Maybe we need a bit of a magnifying glass, to be able to look at whether what the issues are here. So, of course, Venus might be retrograde, for example, in your natal chart as well. And often people ask me, oh, what does it mean, when I make a video, a transit video? So I decided to kind of talk to you about that a little bit because in case you're going to have question. And again, there's not much of a difference really because on one hand, this might indicate that when it comes to your love life, yet it's a little bit held back, or you are approaching love stories from maybe a cautious way. And the reason being is because Venus retrograde might indicate that you got burned before, especially in the sign of Aries, though. Okay. So, and then also you might be wondering, why on earth I'm not able to make kind of like more meaningful connections with others. So it could come with a little bit of a self-esteem issue, lack of confidence, especially in the sign of Aries. But also very important to remember that having Venus retrograde in your chart is not going to make you single, okay? It's not going to be yeah, basically destroying your love life completely is just all about having to reflect on yourself. Because the retrograde planets are often also said that you needed to learn a lesson. And maybe what you need to be learning about is the ability to love yourself. And that's especially the topic in the sign of Aries. Yes, sometimes you might be going through intense relationship experiences if Venus is retrograde in your chart, especially in the sign of Aries, which is on one hand the representation of power. So why am I handing the power over to others? Why am I lacking power? And so forth. And maybe the way you got burned in relationships actually was connected to your childhood. Why is that? Because Venus has got planetary joy in the fifth house. And I love working with planetary joys because it always shows to me potentially psychological blockages, but it also shows me how you can get out of those and then how you can make that planet more happy. Now, so let's just summarize so far what we've kind of learned. So Venus retrograde, basically it's from March 1st till April 12th. It starts in Aries and then it goes back into the sign of Pisces. So it's going to be kind of like covering two parts of your chart, potentially two houses if you use whole sign house system. And of course, while it starts in the sign of Aries, where you are reflecting on your individuality, on your relationships, it goes back into that dreamy and mystical type of Piscean sign where things could be washed away. But look at those houses. So, for example, it's going to be the second and the first house to me or for me. So maybe I have to be reevaluating how my connection to food and then making realization about how that affects my physical body. So, because the retrograde starts in Aries, all of a sudden your priorities are not going to be shifting into a different house. You're going to have to combine them. Okay. Or, for example, it is happening in your sixth house, and then it's going back into the fifth house, right? So that's about to balance out work and fun, and that will be important. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Now, of course, Venus is the planet of love and values, so we have to be reassessing of whether I get valued as an individual or who I value in my life, or actually what I value. Now, some astrologers will say, oh, do not get married, or do not start a new relationship, or do not make any major financial decisions because then you are going to be doomed. Do I agree with that? Surely not. However, it's definitely telling you, for example, from a financial point of view, that yes, you're going to have to be able to be a little bit more cautious about how much money you spend. Or maybe you have to be kind of like, because we also need to remember Venus goes retrograde in the sign of Aries. Now, Saturn has got full position there, and Saturn will be there also. So it is talking to us about having to relook at our budgets, for example. Venus is also connected to anything that is aesthetically pleasing. So basically, the beauty so again, probably you will be hearing on different type of channels that it's not so favorable to do any type of beautification projects on yourself, such as, I don't know, having a haircut or having a plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery and so forth. Or Venus can representation, let's say if it's in your fourth house, do not do renovation in your home and so forth. I think it's not actually entirely true. However, retrograde might show that you just need to be able to plan this out big time because things can go slightly wrong. So, for example, you do a renovation in your apartment, and then because it happens in your fourth house, for example, for a Capricorn rising sign, then you might have to be calling the person back to do that some type of touch up. Now, let's talk about the love side of it. Yes, Venus retrograde also is said to bring back past lovers from our lives. So they might be reappearing in our lives because there is an unfinished business there. And maybe this is the time when we need to be able to end that relationship. And yes, Venus in Aries has got pretty much of a weak, a detrimental position. I call it as the Angelina Jolie aspect because she's always running around with guns in her pocket, even with, I think, a Cancer rising sign. Yes, she's got a Cancer rising sign. But anyway, we are not here to talk about her. So surely this might be a little bit frustrating position, especially if I don't have the kind of like the independence, for example, in my relationship. Maybe it's kind of like with that Pisces end that I'm giving up on hope that I am ever going to be independent from something. Or maybe I give up on hope of ever being able to be in love as well. So it also feels like with that Venus in Aries that we need to be pushing the gas pedal to be able to be in a relationship, which is going to be somehow magical. And that's the reason why you need to be looking at your value system as well. Who I allow to enter or appear in my life. Now, if you are in a relationship, yes, Venus retrograde might be bringing certain type of complications, and maybe this is a complication connected to the past. Now, that I gave you the time or the year 2017, but also you can be thinking back to 2021 as well, what was going down in your life. Now, let me not talk about why 2021 is also important, but it's connected to the inferior and the superior conjunction, by the way. Now, um, also, Venus is somehow how we attract things into our life. And because it's in the sign of Aries, that's all about being spontaneous. So whether I can be flirty, whether I'm kind of like is because Venus in Aries is not necessarily a ladylike position. So Angelina Jolie syndrome, running around with a gun in her pocket. And that's not necessarily the way how women are kind of like depicted, right? So definitely there is that fighting spirit with this Venus. And Aries is all about wanting to achieve something. And maybe we want to be achieving financial security, for example, with Venus here. Because Aries has got that entitlement. I am entitled to have money. I'm entitled to be in a equal partnership and so forth. And if those are not there for you just yet, then those are the topics that you have to be able to revisit. Now, Venus is in its detriment in the sign of Aries, as I mentioned before. The reason why is because Aries is opposite from Libra, and Libra is ruled by Venus. So, yes, sometimes with Venus in Aries, there's an element of an impatience. And when it goes back into the sign of Pisces, we give up on something. Sometimes Venus in Aries is very arrogant. But then in the sign of Pisces, back in there, we are craving for the forgiveness of others because we shooted something out of our pocket and then we regret that later on and hoping that they're going to be able to forgive us. Venus in Aries sometimes acts really childish and really naive as well. And then there is this realization that oh my days, I got kind of scammed. I got, pulled into a relationship story, for example, which I should have said no at the very beginning. And by the way, this Venus is going to be making a conjunction to Saturn and North Node as well. On top of my head, it's on the 25th degree of or 26th degree of Pisces. So it's going to be happening straight after or I haven't checked up the date, so sorry about that. Straight after or straight before Venus goes retrograde or direct. Okay. So surely it would feel like that we made a mistake somehow. And surely we're going to have to learn to be patient, to kind of grow up a little bit, right? And Aries is not necessarily being introspective overall. So that's again a little bit of a challenging side with this retrogression here. And yes, if you have been going through a pretty much of a tough time in your relationship, it could bring an end to that. However, if you are in a happy and great relationship, yes, it could indicate that we are on a rocky road still when it comes to intimacy department, for example. Again, remember Aries is a sexual sign and Venus has got a planetary joy in the fifth house, which is the house of sex. So then that might need to be revisited. And and also, from a money and financial side of Venus, um, again, it's very similar in a way. So maybe what we need to be looking at is whether, I am kind of like having money blockages here And that needs to be worked through. And the blockages are going to be coming from the detrimental position of Venus, and Venus is ending up pretty much making a conjunction to Saturn and North Node. And maybe you are thinking about how to drag yourself out of this ditch financially. And that's the reason why we need to be reevaluating something there. So I wouldn't say that Venus retrograde is something to be extremely afraid of, and then you shouldn't be going on a date and making certain type of purchases and so on. But it always comes with a bit of a like being cautious. And especially because this, as I said, Venus is going to be ending up on the North Node and Saturn. What else can we mention about this? I mean, Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars, right? So it is all about courage and and impulsiveness. So maybe the question here is that you are scared to ask someone out on a date, for example. And that's what you're going to have to be reevaluating. Maybe when it comes to how you approach your love life, it could really talk to you about that you are not the most romantic person. With Venus in the sign of Aries. And then going back into the sign of Pisces, we're gonna just have to awaken our romantic side a little bit. Maybe, I mean, retrogression often represents inner struggle. So it looks like that we having to make a kind of like a decision about whether this particular relationship is going to be carried on or we are going to be ending that. So think about alliances between two countries as well. Do we want to talk to each other? Do we want to support each other or not? So, and then if we decide not to, it can lead to certain type of gunfire or volatile dynamics between two people. So, yeah, that's a bit of a challenge there, right? Or we also call Venus as the planet of self-worth. So maybe you just cannot see yourself as a strong individual. Maybe what happens is that you need validation from others, or you need validation, or you feel validated by having certain amount of money, for example, in your bank account. And this retrograde might be telling you that you need to be reevaluating that also. Does it really define you, how much money you've got in your bank account? You know, there is that saying that whatever you wear doesn't make you a human, or whatever ways you guys are using that in English. That's how we kind of say it in Hungarian. So that might be something that you need to be able to kind of work with. And it could bring you self-doubt. It could give you Venus again, planetary joy in the fifth house, so it has got a lot to do with creativity as well. So you might not see yourself creative. You might not feel empowered by others, or you don't feel the strength to assert yourself confidently in certain type of situations. So surely it feels like with Venus retrograde that there is an element of growth within the sign of Aries. Yes, it's a challenged way. So challenges are presented to us so that we can go through a self-discovery, we can go through a personal growth. Chiron is also in the sign of Aries. So it might be talking to us about, even though they are not going to be making a conjunction during the retrograde period, but they are in the same sign. So it also looks like that some of the past situations needs to be healed. I think we're gonna have to be more authentic. We're gonna have to do self-reflection here. We're gonna have to be accepting ourselves the way we are. We're gonna have to practice a bit more self-love as well. And the acceptance also coming from Pisces, surely. A lot of self-discovery here, right? And a lot of complexities that needs to be discovered and probably kind of like cut out as well. It also really feels like to me because sometimes Venus is greedy and maybe we feel like that we have been compromising quite a lot and then I'm not getting enough back in return. So imagine that you are in a relationship and it really feels like that you put everything in it and then it's not getting reciprocated. And then Venus in the sign of Aries feels like that I have to take action about that. So maybe I'm even creating tensions so that at least I'm getting certain type of attention. And Aries is kind of like head on, right? So we confront others about their feelings and so forth. Also, also, maybe because Venus is connected to your talents as well. So maybe also you need to be looking at with Aries, which can be very passionate, very motivated. So looking at what you truly are passionate about. And maybe it's time to prioritize those. Yeah, that might be also a very important statement to kind of make here. So, guys, I think I've described this Venus retrograde for you in depth. I hope it helps. And my next videos are going to be about all these broken down for the 12 signs. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Bye bye.